Hey everyone, welcome back to True Stories with Mark. I'm Mark, and if you're new here, this is the place where we dive into real stories, real people, and the moments that changed everything. Some of these stories will surprise you. Some will break your heart. Some will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people around you. Is stranger than anything you could make up. Before we get into today's story, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next one. All right, let's get into it.
Cleveland, Ohio, spring of 2011. Sarah Bennett was 26 years old, working as a pediatric nurse at a hospital downtown, when a coworker dragged her to a birthday party at a rooftop bar. She didn't want to go. She had a double shift the next morning, and she was exhausted. But she went anyway because that's the kind of person Sarah was. She showed up for people. That night, she met a man named David Callahan. David was 30 years old, tall, easygoing, with the kind of laugh that made a room feel warmer. He worked in regional sales for a mid-sized medical equipment company, which meant he traveled a lot, something that, at the time, seemed like nothing more than an interesting detail about his job. He told Sarah he was based out of Cleveland but covered territory across 4 states. He talked about his work with real enthusiasm. He remembered small details from their conversation days later. He called when he said he'd call. Sarah has said, looking back on those early days, that what drew her to him wasn't anything flashy. He wasn't trying too hard to impress her. He just felt solid, steady, like someone she could actually build a life with. Not fireworks, but the kind of dependable warmth that made her believe she'd finally found the real thing. They dated for a year and a half. David met her parents at Thanksgiving. He helped her older brother move apartments twice. He showed up early to things and left thoughtful notes on her car windshield before early shifts. In every visible way, David Callahan was exactly the kind of man a family hopes their daughter brings home. In the fall of 2012, on a trip to a lakeside cabin in Michigan, David proposed. Sarah said yes without hesitation. They were married the following June in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Cleveland, in front of 90 guests. Sarah's mother cried through the entire ceremony. David's side of the family, notably, was smaller. He told people his parents had passed years earlier and that he wasn't close with the rest of his relatives. Nobody thought much of it. Plenty of people have complicated families. What nobody in that room knew, what nobody would know for almost 10 years, was that this was not the first time David Callahan had stood at an altar, and it would not be the last. For the first 2 years of their marriage, life looked exactly like it was supposed to. David and Sarah bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a suburb called Fairview Heights, just outside Cleveland. Sarah kept working at the hospital, eventually moving into a supervisory role. David's job had him on the road roughly 2 weeks out of every month, Tuesday through Friday, sometimes longer, covering what he described as his Western territory. In 2014, Sarah gave birth to their first child, a son named Ethan. 18 months later came their daughter, Lily. David's travel schedule, if anything, seemed to increase after the kids were born. He explained it as his company expanding his region westward. New accounts, new hospital systems, more ground to cover. He said the extra travel was temporary, that it would ease up once he trained a junior rep to take some of the accounts off his plate. Sarah didn't push back. Plenty of families make this kind of arrangement work. She had her mother nearby to help with the kids, a strong network of friends from the hospital, and a husband who, when he was home, was genuinely present, cooking pancakes on Saturday mornings, coaching Ethan's t-ball team when his schedule allowed, never missing a video call at bedtime when he was away. Sarah later reflected that he really was a good father in the moments he was actually there, and that's exactly what made the whole thing so impossible to see coming. You don't go looking for cracks in something that looks whole. David's territory, as it turned out, centered heavily around one city in particular, Denver, Colorado. He told Sarah it was simply where the bulk of his accounts happened to be clustered. 3 major hospital systems, a handful of outpatient surgical centers, and a growing relationship with a regional distributor. It made sense that he'd be there often. It made sense that he kept a company-provided extended stay apartment there instead of racking up hotel bills every week. Sarah had seen the apartment once, briefly, on a video call. Beige walls, a couch, nothing memorable. What Sarah did not know was that 14 months into their marriage, on a Thursday evening in October of 2014, David Callahan walked into a bar near Union Station in downtown Denver and sat 2 stools down from a 31-year-old graphic designer named Amanda Reyes. Amanda Reyes was nothing like Sarah on paper, but the 2 women shared a striking number of qualities: warm, independent, well-liked by everyone who knew them, the kind of person friends called first with good news. She'd moved to Denver from Albuquerque 5 years earlier for a design job and had built a full life there. A close circle of friends, a rescue dog named Biscuit, a condo she was slowly paying off near the Highlands neighborhood. David told her his name was David Callahan. He didn't even bother inventing an alias, which investigators would later find almost more unsettling than if he had. He told her he was single, that he'd been badly burned by a long relationship that ended 2 years earlier, and that his work had him traveling constantly, based out of Cleveland, but basically living out of a suitcase. Amanda, for her part, wasn't looking for anything serious. Neither was he, apparently. That's what made it easy at first. Amanda has since said that he never pressured her for anything, that he'd come into town, they'd get dinner, and sometimes she wouldn't hear from him for 2 weeks before he'd show up at her door with flowers, like it was nothing. She told herself she liked the freedom of it. Looking back, she believes she liked him more than she let herself admit, and that he knew exactly how to keep that door open without ever asking her to close it. For the first year, it was casual. As casual as something can be when one party is quietly building an entire second identity to sustain it. David was careful. He paid for the Denver apartment through his company card, which he was authorized to use for lodging during business travel. A detail that would later work heavily against him, since it meant his employer had, without knowing it, been subsidizing his second life for years. He kept a separate phone for a while, a cheap prepaid one, before eventually deciding it was safer to just have 2 contacts saved under different names in his primary phone. Sarah listed as home, Amanda listed under a fake name, Mike, distributor, in case anyone ever looked over his shoulder. By the fall of 2015, what had started as something casual had turned into something else. Amanda had fallen for him, genuinely, deeply. And David, whatever else could be said about him, seemed to have fallen for her too. He started spending 4, sometimes 5 nights a week in Denver instead of 3. His territory kept mysteriously expanding. In December of 2015, on a ski trip to Breckenridge, David proposed to Amanda Reyes. She said yes. He was at that point still legally married to Sarah Callahan, with 2 children under the age of 2 waiting for him back in Ohio. Bigamy, the act of marrying someone while still legally married to another person, is a felony in most U.S. states, though prosecutions are rarer than you'd think, largely because it depends on someone finding out and reporting it. David Callahan understood on some level the risk he was taking. According to testimony given later, he told Amanda he wanted a small courthouse ceremony rather than anything large. He said he didn't want a big wedding after already having done the big wedding thing once, a lie he dressed up as emotional maturity. Amanda, wanting to respect what she believed was a difficult past for him, agreed without pushing. In February of 2016, David Callahan and Amanda Reyes were married at the Denver County Clerk and Recorder's office, with 2 of Amanda's co-workers as witnesses. On the marriage license, David listed his employer, his date of birth accurately, and, critically, a detail investigators would later flag, a Denver P.O. box as his residential address rather than his real home in Ohio. He signed the document under his real legal name. There was no alias. He was simply betting that no government database would ever cross-reference 2 separate state marriage records for the same man. And for almost 8 more years, he was right. From that point forward, David Callahan was legally married to 2 women simultaneously, in 2 different states, each of whom believed she was his only wife. The logistics of what came next are almost dizzying to lay out. David's actual job and his actual sales territory gave him a legitimate reason to be away from Ohio roughly half of every month. But even that wasn't enough to cover the life he was now building. He began quietly shifting patterns, telling Sarah his trips ran Tuesday to Saturday instead of Tuesday to Friday, claiming an extra training seminar here, a regional conference there, telling Amanda that his territory sometimes pulled him back to a home office in Cleveland for a few days at a stretch, which was, in its own twisted way, technically true. He missed things. He missed Ethan's second birthday party because of a trip Sarah later learned was actually his wedding rehearsal dinner in Colorado. He missed Amanda's father's retirement party, telling her a hospital system in Ohio had an emergency equipment failure that only he could handle. Sarah later put it simply, "There were absences, of course there were absences, but there's always a reasonable-sounding explanation ready, every single time, if the person giving it has had 10 years of practice." By 2017, David Callahan wasn't just maintaining 2 relationships. He was maintaining 2 entire households, 2 social circles, 2 extended families, and eventually 2 sets of children. In Ohio, Ethan was 3 and Lily was almost 2. Sarah had gone back to work part-time, and the Callahan household ran on the kind of exhausted, love-filled chaos familiar to any young family. School drop-offs, pediatrician appointments, birthday parties, Sunday dinners with Sarah's parents. David, when he was home, folded into that life seamlessly. Neighbors described him as friendly, if a little scarce. Sarah's mother would later say she sometimes worried David worked too hard and would tell Sarah to make sure he was taking care of himself. In Colorado, Amanda was pregnant. Their daughter, whom they named Grace, was born in August of 2017. David was in the delivery room. He took what he told his company was a 2-week unpaid leave for a family emergency, and what he told Sarah was an unusually demanding stretch of back-to-back business trips that unfortunately overlapped with a rough patch when both kids had the flu and she could have really used him home. A detail she would later describe as one of the cruelest parts of the whole ordeal once she learned the truth. David became, in effect, 2 different fathers to 2 different families, and by every account from those who knew him in both lives, he was not simply going through the motions in either one. He learned Ethan's favorite dinosaurs. He learned Grace's favorite lullaby. He remembered Lily's fear of the vacuum cleaner and Amanda's aversion to cilantro. Investigators and family therapists who later studied cases like this one often note that this is what makes long-term double lives so psychologically disorienting for everyone involved once uncovered. The deception wasn't a performance layered over indifference. In both homes, by all appearances, David seemed to genuinely love the people he was lying to. A therapist who later consulted on the case put it this way: "People want to believe a man like this is simply a con artist collecting victims. And sometimes that's true. But more often what you're looking at in a case like this is someone who has convinced himself he can compartmentalize guilt indefinitely. That as long as neither world touches the other, no one gets hurt. It's not an excuse. It's a coping mechanism built on an enormous, unsustainable lie." David developed an elaborate internal system to keep the 2 lives separate. He used 2 calendars, one synced to a work email only Sarah had access to, one to a personal account only he checked. He kept receipts and gift purchases scrupulously separated by city. He never posted on social media, telling both women he found it performative and preferred to keep his life private. A boundary neither Sarah nor Amanda questioned, since plenty of people feel that way. He remembered with almost frightening precision which lies he told to which household, cross-referencing details in his head before every phone call. For nearly 6 years, the system held. Every account of a hidden double life that eventually comes apart seems to include, somewhere in the middle, a series of small, almost forgettable moments that only make sense in hindsight. For Sarah, the first of these came in the spring of 2019. She was going through David's suit jacket before dropping it at the dry cleaner and found a receipt from a jewelry store in Denver. A purchase for a pair of earrings, dated 2 weeks earlier, for just under $400. She hadn't received any earrings. When she asked him about it that evening, David didn't miss a beat. He told her they were meant to be a surprise for her birthday, which was, conveniently, about 6 weeks away, and that she'd just ruined it. Sarah felt guilty for asking. She apologized. On her birthday, a pair of earrings, purchased, in fact, from a different store, quickly, days before, arrived exactly as promised. Sarah later admitted she actually felt bad for having asked in the first place, and that this was part of what made it so hard to explain to people afterward. He turned her suspicion into something she had to apologize for. He was good at that. Really good. There were other moments. A hotel charge from a stretch of days when he'd told her he was staying with a colleague. A missed video call, blamed on bad hotel Wi-Fi that Sarah later learned occurred during Amanda's birthday dinner. A weekend David claimed to be at a work retreat in Arizona that Sarah's friends swore she saw him at a Denver farmer's market with a woman and a baby. A claim Sarah dismissed at the time, telling her friend she must have mistaken someone else for David because the alternative was too enormous to seriously entertain. This is, according to people who study these cases, one of the most common threads in long-running deceptions. The betrayed spouse isn't lacking in evidence. They're lacking in a framework for imagining something so far outside the world they believe they're living in. Sarah wasn't naive. She simply had no reason to imagine a second wife and a second child 300 miles away. So her mind, like most minds would, reached for smaller, more survivable explanations first. Meanwhile, 300 miles west, Amanda was having her own quiet doubts. David's trips back to Cleveland had grown longer. He'd started taking calls in another room. Once she'd seen a text notification flash on his phone from a contact saved as Mike and Distributor that read in part about someone's game on Saturday and David being home soon. A message that struck her as strange, since David had told her his sales assistant Mike handled distributor relationships, not childcare logistics. When she asked about it, David said Mike was going through a messy custody situation and sometimes vented to him. Amanda let it go. If there's one period that puts more pressure on a hidden double life than almost any other, it's a moment when the entire country stops traveling. In March of 2020, as the world shut down in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, David Callahan faced a problem he had never had to solve before. For the first time in his adult life, there was nowhere he could plausibly say he needed to be. Sales travel halted almost overnight. Hospitals restricted outside vendors from entering their buildings. David's company, like most, shifted to remote work and video conferencing. For about 6 agonizing weeks, David told Sarah his essential accounts required limited, careful in-person visits. A claim that was technically sometimes true, since medical equipment sales was in fact deemed partially essential. He used it to justify 2 short trips to Cleveland area hospital systems that were in reality drives to Denver he made in a rental car to avoid airport records under his usual travel profile. It was, by David's own later admission during legal proceedings, the closest the entire structure came to collapsing years before it actually did. Amanda, isolated at home with a toddler and increasingly suspicious about David's sudden reluctance to do video calls because the hotel Wi-Fi couldn't handle it, pressed him harder than she ever had before. Sarah, similarly isolated with 2 young children and a husband who seemed unusually anxious and distracted, later said this period was when she first began to feel something was genuinely wrong. Not just absent husband wrong, but a deeper unease she couldn't name. He was on edge in a way she'd never seen, and at the time she chalked it up to pandemic stress and the state of the world. Only later did she understand he'd been watching his entire life threaten to fall apart, with nothing to do but keep lying faster. David survived those 6 weeks the way he'd survived everything else, through improvisation, careful timing, and a willingness to tell whatever version of the truth kept the peace in whichever house he was standing in. By early summer of 2020, travel restrictions eased enough that his cover story could resume its normal rhythm. The system, battered but intact, held for 3 more years. In 2021, the balance David had spent years maintaining tilted even further. Sarah, after years of talking about it, became pregnant again. A surprise welcomed happily by both of them, at least outwardly. Their 3rd child, a daughter named Maya, was born in January of 2022. That same year in Denver, Amanda gave birth to David's 2nd child with her, a son, Owen, born in September of 2022. David Callahan was now simultaneously the father of 4 children across 2 households who did not know the other existed, husband to 2 women who each believed themselves to be his only wife, and an employee whose entire travel and expense history, had anyone ever bothered to audit it, told a story neither woman could have imagined. Colleagues who worked with David during this period describe him as increasingly tired, increasingly private, but never anything close to what they'd later learn he was managing. One former coworker later said he was good at his job, genuinely good. Clients liked him. But looking back, nobody at the company could tell you a single thing about his life outside of work, and everyone had simply assumed that meant he was private. It never occurred to any of them that it meant he had two of everything: 4 children, 2 wives, 2 mortgages, 2 sets of birthdays, 2 Christmases, 2 anniversaries, all tracked in David's head with a precision that would have been, in almost any other context, an impressive feat of organization. But systems built entirely on human memory and constant vigilance have a way of eventually failing. Not all at once, but one small slip at a time. And by the end of 2022, those slips had begun. The beginning of the end, according to court records, started with something almost absurdly small: a school fundraiser. In October of 2023, Ethan's elementary school in Ohio held a fall carnival. And like most schools these days, the PTA posted photos afterward to a public Facebook page for parents who couldn't attend. Sarah was tagged in several. David appeared in the background of one photo, helping run a ring toss booth, grinning, a Cleveland Browns cap on his head. Roughly 2,000 miles away, that same public Facebook page was shared into a Denver area parents group by a woman who'd once lived in Ohio and still followed several old community pages out of habit. Amanda happened to scroll past it on a Tuesday night while feeding Owen. She almost kept scrolling. Almost. Amanda later said she stopped because of the hat. Such a small thing, really. He'd always told her he grew up in Colorado and didn't follow football, and he'd certainly never mentioned liking the Browns. She looked at the picture longer, and it was undeniably him. Amanda told herself at first that it had to be a coincidence. A man who looked remarkably like David, at a school event in a state he supposedly had no ties to. But something about the photo gnawed at her enough that she did something she'd never done before in 7 years of marriage. She zoomed in on the tagged names in the comments, found the school's name in the post caption, and searched it alongside David's name. Nothing came up directly. David wasn't on social media, but one comment from a parent referenced the Callahan family being out again and how much fun Ethan had had. A name Amanda recognized instantly because it was her own married name too. She sat with that comment for 3 days before she said anything to anyone. Amanda didn't confront David right away. Instead, in November of 2023, she did what a growing number of suspicious spouses do in the age of digital footprints. She hired a private investigator. The investigator she found, a former Denver police detective named Ray Ferris, who specialized in infidelity and financial fraud cases, later described it as one of the more straightforward cases he'd worked, once he knew what he was looking for. Amanda gave him David's full legal name, his date of birth, his employer, and the Ohio school and community details from the Facebook photo. Ferris later explained that usually in these cases you're chasing a hunch with almost nothing to go on, but here he had a name, a birthday, and a city. It took him 4 days to find a Cuyahoga County property record with David's name on the deed, jointly held with a Sarah Callahan. It took another 2 weeks in a records request to find the marriage license. And that's when he called Amanda and told her she needed to sit down. The marriage license Ferris found was dated June of 2013, nearly 3 years before David married Amanda in Denver. It listed David Callahan's full legal name, his correct date of birth, and Sarah Bennett as his spouse. There was no ambiguity, no coincidence to hide behind. David Callahan was legally married to another woman when he married Amanda, and had remained married to her the entire time. Ferris also pulled property records showing the Fairview Heights home, purchased jointly by David and Sarah in 2013, and still actively held by both names. He found through further digging 3 children's names associated with school enrollment records tied to that address: Ethan, Lily, and Maya Callahan. Ferris later described it as one of the harder pieces of news he'd delivered to a client. It wasn't just infidelity, it was an entire second family. A whole life David had built in another state that had been running in parallel to Amanda's for almost her entire relationship with him. He remembered her asking him to check it again, and then again, as though a second look might come back different. Amanda sat with the report for 2 weeks before deciding what to do. She has said in later interviews that the hardest part wasn't the anger. The anger came fast and stayed. The hardest part was grief for a version of her marriage and her family that she now understood had never actually existed the way she believed it did. She eventually made a decision that would change everything for both households. Rather than confronting David directly, where he might have a chance to explain, minimize, or disappear entirely, she decided to reach out to Sarah. Finding Sarah wasn't difficult. Ferris had already pulled her full name and the family's address as part of his investigation. Amanda debated for days how to make contact. A letter felt too impersonal for something this enormous. Showing up in person felt cruel and dangerous, given she had no idea how David, or Sarah, might react. In the end, on a Sunday evening in December of 2023, Amanda called the Callahan home landline, a number Ferris had also located through public records. Sarah answered. David was in the shower. Amanda has said she didn't even know how to start, so she simply told Sarah her name was Amanda Callahan and that she thought they might be married to the same man. There was a silence on the line that felt like it lasted an hour. Then Sarah said very quietly, that wasn't possible, that her husband was David Callahan, a sales rep in Cleveland right now with their kids. Amanda told her he was married to her too, in Denver, and that they had 2 children together. Sarah just kept repeating that she couldn't believe it. The call lasted almost 90 minutes. Over the course of it, the 2 women, strangers an hour earlier, now bound together by a decade of shared deception, compared dates, photos, and details that neither of them had ever had reason to question until that moment. The earrings from the receipt Sarah had found in 2019 lined up almost to the week with Amanda's actual birthday, not Sarah's. The hospital emergency that had kept David from Ethan's second birthday party lined up exactly with Amanda and David's wedding date in Denver. The missed video call blamed on hotel Wi-Fi lined up with Amanda's own birthday dinner. Piece by piece, 10 years of small, forgettable inconsistencies resolved into a single, enormous, coherent picture. Sarah later described hanging up the phone and hearing the shower still running down the hall and feeling in a strange, calm way that he didn't know yet that for a few more minutes he still believed this was his life. She has said she walked to the bathroom door and stood there for a second before opening it, because she knew the moment she did, it would be the last normal moment either of them would ever have. What happened next, according to Sarah's later account, and corroborated in part by a 911 call placed that evening, unfolded quickly. Sarah stood outside the bathroom door until the shower shut off and David stepped out, still smiling from whatever unfinished thought had been in his head a moment earlier, asking if she was okay because she looked pale. She asked him simply who Amanda was. For a brief moment, his smile didn't fully leave his face. A small, telling delay Sarah would describe later as the moment she knew, with total certainty, before he'd said a single word. He tried at first to deflect the question, but she named it plainly. Amanda Callahan, his wife in Denver, with his 2 other children. That was when his expression finally broke. By Sarah's account, David didn't deny it. Not fully, not for long. He attempted in the minutes that followed to frame it as something that had gotten out of control rather than something he had built, brick by brick, choice by choice, over a decade. He asked her not to call anyone. He asked for time to figure out how to handle it. Sarah, holding 3-year-old Maya's baby monitor in one hand and her phone in the other, told him to leave the house that night and did not let him back inside. She called her sister first. Then the following morning, on the advice of a lawyer her sister found for her within hours, she called the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office. Bigamy charges were filed against David Callahan in Ohio in January of 2024. Because the second marriage had taken place in Colorado, Colorado authorities opened a parallel investigation and additional charges, including a count related to the company credit card he had used for years to fund lodging and travel connected to his relationship with Amanda, were referred to his former employer's legal team, who launched their own internal investigation and terminated him within the month. The months that followed were, by every account, brutal for everyone involved, except arguably David, who at least had the advantage of already knowing the full truth everyone else was only just discovering. Sarah filed for divorce in February of 2024, citing fraud in addition to the standard grounds. A legal strategy her attorney used specifically because David's marriage to her had technically remained valid the entire time, while his marriage to Amanda had not. Under Ohio and Colorado law, A second marriage entered into while a person is still legally married to someone else is void from the outset, meaning Amanda's marriage to David had never been legally valid at all. Amanda has described that as its own strange grief, not simply losing a husband, but discovering that on paper she'd never actually had one at all. That 7 years could be legally treated as though they hadn't happened, even though she had a son to prove otherwise. David pleaded guilty to a single count of bigamy in Ohio in June of 2024 as part of a plea agreement that avoided a lengthier felony fraud trial tied to the years of company expenses he'd funneled toward his second household. He received a sentence of 18 months with a portion suspended, along with several years of probation and a restitution order requiring him to repay his former employer for misused travel funds. Custody arrangements for the 4 children were handled separately in family court in each state. David retained limited supervised visitation rights with all 4 of his children, contingent on a range of court-mandated conditions, including individual therapy. A requirement both Sarah and Amanda, despite everything, ultimately supported, believing the children deserved the chance to have some relationship with their father on carefully rebuilt terms. Sarah says she still goes back and forth on how she feels about that. Some days she thinks the kids deserve to know their father, whatever he did to the rest of the family. Other days she thinks about the fact that Ethan asked her, for months afterward, whether it was something he'd done that made his dad start disappearing so much. A 7-year-old wondering if he wasn't good enough to keep his father home. That, she says, is the part she can't forgive. Not the lying to her, the lying that made her son doubt himself. As is often the case, once a hidden life like this is finally exposed, the deeper investigators dug, the more the scale of it revealed itself. What had looked from the outside like a single decade-long affair that escalated into a second marriage turned out to be a far more elaborate operation than either Sarah or Amanda initially understood. Financial records subpoenaed during the investigation showed that David had, over roughly 9 years, moved an estimated total of $214,000 in company travel and expense reimbursements toward costs directly tied to his second household, lease payments on the Denver apartment before Amanda's condo, later renovations to that condo paid for through falsified client hosting expense reports, a car David kept registered in Colorado under a shared loan with Amanda, and years of dual holiday and birthday spending that, when laid out side by side in the fraud investigators' report, showed an almost mathematically perfect split. Gifts, vacations, and celebrations mirrored across both households within days of each other, year after year. A forensic accountant who worked the case later said what struck her wasn't just the amount of money, but the discipline behind it. Most people who commit this kind of long-running fraud eventually get sloppy because maintaining that level of precision is exhausting. And David didn't get sloppy for the better part of a decade. If anything, the systems got more refined over time, not less, which in her assessment takes a specific kind of person. Someone who isn't overwhelmed by deception, but organized by it. Investigators also uncovered a detail that neither Sarah nor Amanda had known. David had, in fact, been questioned once before, years earlier, about a discrepancy in his expense reports by an internal auditor at his company in 2018. At the time, he'd explained away the irregularity as a clerical error involving a colleague's reimbursement being misfiled under his name, and the matter was closed without further review. It was, in hindsight, the closest the entire structure came to unraveling nearly 6 years before it actually did. And a sobering reminder, investigators noted, of how easily systems designed to catch fraud can be talked past by someone confident and well-liked enough not to be questioned twice. Perhaps the most unexpected part of this entire story is what happened between Sarah and Amanda after the initial shock wore off. In the months following that first 90-minute phone call, the two women, who had every reason to resent each other, to see one another as a rival or an obstacle rather than a fellow victim, instead found themselves leaning on each other in a way neither of them anticipated. Amanda has said she expected at first that the two of them might end up hating each other, and for a while she even wondered if they should. But Sarah hadn't done this to her. David had, and he'd done it to both of them. Once that settled in, talking to Sarah became the only thing that made any of it feel real, because Sarah was the only other person on earth who understood exactly what Amanda was going through, at the exact same time, 300 miles away. Sarah says the two of them talk maybe once a month now, sometimes just logistics, court dates, custody schedules, and sometimes more than that. There's a strange kind of relief, she says, in having one person who never once needs the story explained to them from the beginning. With everyone else, she has to walk through it every time. With Amanda, she just says it's been a hard week, and Amanda already knows exactly why. Family therapists who work with survivors of these kinds of prolonged structural deceptions say this dynamic, while unusual, isn't unheard of. In cases involving long-term bigamy or parallel double lives, the two, or occasionally more, deceived partners often end up as each other's most effective support system, precisely because the betrayal was never actually between the two of them. It was something done to both of them simultaneously by the one person positioned to keep them from ever comparing notes. Sarah and Amanda have, as of the most recent reporting on this case, discussed the possibility of eventually allowing their children to know one another. Half-siblings across 2 states who share a father, neither of their mothers can fully explain to them yet. For now, both women have agreed to wait until the kids are older, and until the divorce and custody proceedings have fully settled before taking that step. David Callahan gave one recorded statement during his sentencing hearing in June of 2024, addressing the court, Sarah, and Amanda directly. It's worth including here, not because it excuses anything, but because it offers a rare, unfiltered glimpse into how someone rationalizes 10 years of sustained deception to themselves. Reading from a prepared statement, he told the court he knew there was nothing he could say that day that would change what he did or undo the damage he'd caused. He said he'd spent a lot of time trying to understand how he became a person capable of this, and that he didn't have a clean answer. It hadn't started as a plan, he said. It started as one lie he told himself he'd correct eventually, and it became easier to keep building on top of it than to ever go back and tell the truth. Every year that passed made the version of him that had to confess feel further away and less real. For a long time, he said, he told himself he was protecting both of them from pain by keeping the 2 lives separate. He said he understood now that he was only protecting himself, and that the pain he was avoiding was always going to arrive eventually. He'd simply made sure it would be so much bigger when it did. He went on to acknowledge specifically the toll on his 4 children, though the judge presiding over the case noted in her remarks that the statement, however sincere it may have been in the moment, did little to address the fundamental disconnect at the heart of the case. A man who had, by his own admission, understood exactly what he was doing at every step, and had simply decided, year after year, that the benefits of the double life outweighed the risks, right up until the moment they didn't. Ray Ferris, the private investigator who broke the case open, offered his own read on David's mindset, drawn from years of working similar cases. People love to ask him if men like this are sociopaths, he said, and sometimes, sure, that's true. But more often what he finds is something almost more unsettling. A person who's genuinely capable of love, genuinely capable of caring about the people in front of him, who has also convinced himself that the truth is optional as long as he's careful enough. It isn't that David didn't feel anything for these 2 women and 4 kids. It's that he felt things for all of them and decided his own comfort mattered more than any of their right to know the truth about the life they were living. David Callahan's case, while extreme in its 10-year duration, is far from unique. Family law attorneys and fraud investigators who handle these cases regularly point to a handful of patterns that show up again and again in long-term double-life deceptions, and it's worth taking a moment to talk through them, because a lot of you watching have asked, over the years, how something like this can possibly go undetected for so long. The first pattern is what investigators call structural cover, a job, hobby, or lifestyle that provides a built-in, socially acceptable reason for prolonged, unquestioned absence. Sales roles, long-haul trucking, military deployment, and certain types of consulting work show up disproportionately often in these cases, not because people in those professions are more likely to deceive, but because those professions make deception dramatically easier to sustain without raising immediate red flags. The second pattern is emotional consistency. Contrary to what a lot of people assume, spouses in these situations are rarely neglected or treated coldly. In fact, the opposite is often true. The deceiving partner frequently overcompensates with attentiveness during the time they are present, precisely because that attentiveness is what keeps the deceived partner from looking too closely at the time they're absent. The third and perhaps most important pattern is what one family therapist interviewed for cases like this called the plausibility gap. Most people, understandably, don't go looking for explanations that require imagining something as enormous as a hidden second family. When small inconsistencies appear, the deceived partner's mind reaches for the most survivable explanation available. A forgotten receipt, a work stressor, a bad connection on a phone call. Because the alternative explanation isn't even on the list of things they know to consider. It isn't a failure of intelligence or attentiveness. It's simply how trust functions. You cannot suspect a category of betrayal you don't know exists. For what it's worth, both Sarah and Amanda, in separate interviews, push back gently on any narrative that frames what happened to them as something they should have caught sooner. Sarah has said that people ask her all the time how she didn't know, and she understands the question, but she'd ask it back a different way. If your husband was a genuinely attentive, present, loving father and partner every single day he was physically with you, how long would it take you to imagine that the rest of his life, the part you couldn't see, was an elaborate lie? It isn't about being naive, she says. It's about the fact that good deception doesn't look like deception. It looks exactly like a normal, happy marriage because that's the entire point of it. As of this recording, David Callahan has served his custodial sentence and is now on probation, living in a small apartment in a suburb of Columbus, roughly 45 minutes from the home he once shared with Sarah and their 3 children. He works, according to public records, in a non-sales role at a smaller company that was reportedly aware of his conviction before hiring him. He sees his 3 Ohio-based children twice a month in supervised visits arranged through family court, and speaks with his son in Colorado over video calls approved as part of a separate custody agreement there. Sarah still lives in the Fairview Heights house with Ethan, Lily, and Maya. She's returned to full-time work at the hospital and has, in the years since, become something of an informal resource for a handful of other women in similar situations who found her through mutual acquaintances or through Amanda. She says she's not interested in dating again anytime soon, though she doesn't rule it out entirely. Sarah has described the aftermath as a long process of feeling like her whole adult life had been retroactively erased. Like none of the good years actually counted anymore, because they were built on something false. It's taken a long time, she says, to get to a place where she can hold both things at once. The marriage was real to her, even if it wasn't what she thought it was. Her kids are real, and the love she felt was real, even if his wasn't what she believed. She says she's allowed to grieve that without pretending the last 10 years didn't happen. Amanda has since sold the Highlands condo and moved with Owen and Grace to a smaller home closer to her sister, who relocated from Albuquerque to help her through the aftermath. She's returned to freelance design work and has, cautiously, begun dating again over the past several months. Amanda has said she used to think trust was something you either have or don't, like a switch. But now she thinks of it as something you rebuild in really small pieces, deciding each time whether you're going to let someone new in far enough to actually see you. It's slower than it used to be, she says, and she checks things now that she never used to think to check. She's not ashamed of that. She believes it's simply what happens after something like this. You don't go back to who you were before. You build someone new who knows a little more about what's possible. Ethan, now 12, has started therapy of his own, which both Sarah and David's court-mandated family counselor recommended, given how directly the discovery affected him. Lily and Maya, both younger, have had an easier time processing the changes so far, though the family therapist working with all 3 children has cautioned that their understanding will likely deepen and may need to be revisited as they get older. Grace and Owen, David and Amanda's children, are still too young to fully understand the situation, though Amanda has said she plans to be honest with them in age-appropriate terms, well before they're old enough to encounter it some other way. I want to end this one a little differently than I usually do, because there's a question I kept coming back to while putting this story together, And I suspect a lot of you are sitting with it too. Why? Not the mechanical how. We've covered that in detail, but the actual why. Why does a person who is, by every account, capable of real love, real partnership, and real fatherhood choose to build an entire second life instead of simply ending the first one or never starting the second? I don't think there's a single satisfying answer, and I think that's part of what makes stories like this one so uncomfortable to sit with. It would almost be easier if David Callahan turned out to be a cartoonish villain, someone incapable of genuine feeling, who saw Sarah and Amanda purely as marks in some long con. That story would let us file him away neatly as an aberration, a category of person entirely separate from ordinary people. But that's not quite what the record shows. What the record shows is someone who, at some point early on, made a small choice to avoid a hard conversation, and then made that same choice again and again, thousands of times, for 10 years, each time telling himself it would be the last time, until avoiding the truth had become the entire architecture of his life. Maybe the more useful question isn't why David did what he did specifically, but what it says about how deception, left unchecked and unconfronted, tends to grow rather than shrink over time. Almost nobody sets out to build a decade-long double life. Most people who end up doing something like this can point to a single, much smaller decision at the very beginning. One lie, one omission, one moment where the truth felt too costly to tell, that simply never got corrected until correcting it felt impossible. If there's a lesson in this story beyond the obvious one, I think it's that. Small, uncorrected dishonesty doesn't stay small, it compounds. And the people who end up paying the highest price for that compounding interest are very rarely the ones who chose to start it. A lot of you who watch this channel regularly know I like to end these stories with a practical takeaway, not because any list of warning signs can fully protect anyone from a determined, skilled liar, but because understanding the pattern can sometimes shorten the distance between a first doubt and clarity. So here's what family therapists, fraud investigators, and both Sarah and Amanda themselves pointed to, in hindsight, as the quiet signals that were there all along, even if none of them were obvious in the moment. The first is what one investigator called unverifiable structure, a job, schedule, or set of responsibilities that can't easily be checked against an outside source. It's not that travel-heavy jobs are inherently suspicious. It's that when literally every claim about someone's whereabouts routes through that person alone, with no independent way to confirm it, the system relies entirely on trust with zero built-in verification. That's not by itself evidence of anything, but it is worth noticing as a structural vulnerability, the same way you'd notice a house with only one working smoke detector. The second is emotional overcorrection after a lapse. Both Sarah and Amanda, independently, described a pattern where after a suspicious moment, a missed call, a strange receipt, an unexplained absence, David would follow up with an unusually generous or affectionate gesture almost immediately afterward. A gift, an extra attentive weekend, a grand romantic reassurance that arrived suspiciously on cue. On its own, generosity isn't a warning sign, but a consistent pattern of disproportionate reassurance, specifically following moments of doubt, is something therapists say is worth paying attention to. The third is resistance to integration. David never introduced Amanda to any of Sarah's friends or family, and never introduced Sarah to anyone in Amanda's circle. A fact that, in isolation, felt explainable given his travel schedule, but that, in hindsight, meant no two people who knew him well enough to compare notes ever actually had the opportunity to. He avoided social media entirely, kept his social circles almost entirely separate from both households, and consistently found reasons why now wasn't quite the right time for the people in his life to meet each other. None of these signs on their own prove anything. Plenty of people travel constantly, express love generously, and keep their social circles compartmentalized without ever being unfaithful, let alone maintaining an entire second family. That's exactly why these cases are so hard to catch. The signs are only clearly visible in hindsight, once you already know what you're looking for. The point of naming them isn't to turn every relationship into an investigation. It's simply to say that something quietly, persistently doesn't sit right with you over a long period of time, That feeling deserves more weight than most of us are inclined to give it. Sarah has said that if she could go back and tell herself one thing, it wouldn't be to search his phone or hire an investigator sooner. It would just be to trust the discomfort. She felt something was off for years before she had any real reason to name it, and she talked herself out of it every single time because the explanation on offer was always so reasonable. Sometimes, she says, the quiet, persistent feeling is the most reliable piece of evidence you have, even when there's nothing concrete attached to it yet. That's the story of David Callahan, a man who spent 10 years as 2 different husbands to 2 different women and 4 different childhoods worth of a father who was never quite fully present in either one. Sarah and Amanda have both, in their own ways, chosen to rebuild rather than be defined by what happened to them, and their children, whatever complicated version of family they end up growing into, will at least grow up with mothers who chose honesty over the pattern that shaped the first decade of their lives. I want to thank both women, indirectly, for allowing their story to be told, even in this altered, anonymized form. Accounts like this, one, matter, not because they're entertaining, though I know that's part of why a lot of us watch these videos late at night, but because they remind us that the people closest to us are knowable in some ways and fundamentally unknowable in others, and that healthy relationships are built less on certainty and more on an ongoing, mutual willingness to be honest even when honesty is inconvenient. If this story affected you, or if it reminded you of something in your own life you've been sitting with, I genuinely encourage you to talk to someone you trust about it. A friend, a family member, or a professional. You don't have to carry a hard realization alone just because it's uncomfortable to say out loud. If you made it this far, thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what part of this one stuck with you the most. I read every single comment, even if I can't always reply to all of them. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. This has been True Stories with Mark.